The signings of the Treaty of Versailles. What if punishing your enemy too harshly after a war actually sets the stage for an even bigger conflict? That's exactly what happened with the Treaty of Versailles. After World War I, Allied leaders forced Germany to accept full blame through the War Guilt Clause, Article 231, pay crippling reparations, and give up key territories like Alsace-Lorraine. Economically devastated, Germany spiraled into hyperinflation and unemployment. The Weimar Republic struggled to rebuild, and extremist groups like the Nazis gained traction. French Marshal Ferdinand Foch famously said, "This is not peace, it is an armistice for 20 years." He was eerily correct. The treaty humiliated Germany, breeding resentment that Adolf Hitler exploited to rise to power. By punishing too harshly and failing to rebuild Europe, the Allies inadvertently set the stage for World War II. Instead of fostering reconciliation, the treaty sowed the seeds of future destruction. It's a stark reminder that peace requires balance, not vengeance. The decision to invade Russia. Imagine sending millions of soldiers into one of the harshest environments on Earth, only to watch them freeze, starve, or vanish into the endless winter. That's exactly what Adolf Hitler did in 1941 with Operation Barbarossa, one of history's most catastrophic military decisions. Hitler's plan was simple: conquer the Soviet Union quickly, seize its resources, and crush communism. But he underestimated everything: the vastness of Russia, its brutal winters, and the Red Army's resilience. German forces stretched thin across thousands of miles. When winter hit, temperatures plummeted to 40 degrees Celsius, freezing soldiers and rendering equipment useless. The turning point came at Stalingrad. Hitler refused to retreat, even as Soviet forces encircled his army. Over 250,000 Germans died, and hundreds of thousands were captured. This disastrous invasion drained Germany's resources, weakened its army, and marked the beginning of the end for the Third Reich. Hitler's arrogance didn't just cost him an empire, it changed history forever. Isolate the American colonies. What happens when a government ignores the grievances of its own citizens? You spark a revolution. In the 1760s and 1770s, Britain imposed heavy taxes like the Stamp Act, 1765, and Tea Act, 1773, on its American colonies to recover debts from the French and Indian War. Instead of easing tensions, these measures fueled outrage. Colonists protested with slogans like, "No taxation without representation." When protests escalated, Britain responded with force, sending troops to quell dissent. Events like the Boston Massacre, 1770, and the Intolerable Acts, 1774, pushed colonists toward revolution. The First Continental Congress united the colonies, and the Revolutionary War began in 1775. Britain's refusal to address grievances alienated loyal subjects. By isolating the colonies, they lost access to valuable resources and markets. This costly decision reminds us that oppressive policies often backfire, sparking movements for independence. It also highlights how arrogance and miscommunication can lead to the collapse of even the strongest empires. The launch of the Chernobyl nuclear reactor test. What happens when engineers ignore safety protocols during a nuclear reactor test? You get one of the worst disasters in human history. On April 26, 1986, engineers at the Chernobyl nuclear plant decided to run a safety test on Reactor 4, simulating a power outage scenario. Despite warnings about design flaws in the RBMK reactor, they disabled critical safety systems. When the reactor overheated, it triggered a massive explosion, releasing radioactive fallout across Europe. The Soviet government initially tried to cover it up, delaying evacuations and downplaying the disaster. Over 350,000 people were displaced, and thousands suffered from radiation-related illnesses. Pripyat, a nearby town, became a ghost city overnight. Even today, the exclusion zone remains uninhabitable, with wildlife reclaiming the area. This decision highlights the dangers of cutting corners and prioritizing pride over safety, a lesson we're still learning decades later. Chernobyl serves as a haunting reminder of humanity's fallibility in the face of technological advancement. The Battle of Karansebes. Picture this: an entire army wipes itself out without the enemy ever firing a single shot. Sounds impossible, right? Yet that's exactly what happened during the Battle of Karansebes in 1788. Austrian troops stationed near Karansebes mistook themselves for the enemy. It started when scouts fired at shadowy figures they thought were Ottoman forces. Panic spread as soldiers shouted conflicting orders. Rumors of an attack caused chaos. Cavalry charged through camps, and infantry opened fire blindly. Alcohol-fueled confusion made matters worse as drunken soldiers clashed with each other. By morning, 10,000 Austrian soldiers lay dead or wounded, all without the Ottomans ever arriving. This self-inflicted massacre became a symbol of poor communication and paranoia in warfare. Sometimes, the greatest threats come not from enemies, but from our own mistakes. Karansebes reminds us how fear and confusion can lead to disaster. The Cuban Missile Crisis. For 13 days in 1962, the world held its breath as two superpowers teetered on the brink of nuclear war. What caused this terrifying standoff? A reckless gamble by Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev. He secretly shipped nuclear missiles to Cuba, just 90 miles from the U.S. coast, while the U.S. had missiles stationed in Turkey. When American spy planes discovered them, President John F. Kennedy faced a dilemma: invade Cuba or risk nuclear war. For 13 tense days, negotiations unfolded. The U.S. imposed a naval blockade, while Soviet submarines armed with nuclear torpedoes lurked nearby. One submarine captain almost launched a torpedo, narrowly avoiding catastrophe. Eventually, the Soviets backed down, agreeing to remove the missiles in exchange for a U.S. promise not to invade Cuba. While disaster was averted, this reckless gamble could have ended humanity. It serves as a stark reminder of how close we've come to global annihilation due to miscalculation. The fall of Constantinople. In 1453, Byzantine Emperor Constantine XI made a fateful choice. He refused to surrender Constantinople to the Ottoman Turks, despite being vastly outnumbered. His decision stemmed from pride and hope for Western reinforcements that never came. The Ottomans, led by Sultan Mehmed II, used advanced cannons to breach the ancient walls. The largest cannon, nicknamed Basilica, fired massive stone projectiles weighing over 200 pounds, shattering defenses that had stood for centuries. Despite their bravery, the Byzantines were overwhelmed. On May 29, 1453, Ottoman forces breached the gates, and Constantine died in battle, marking the end of the Byzantine Empire. The fall of Constantinople reshaped Europe. It ended the Middle Ages, sparked the Renaissance by forcing scholars to flee to Italy with ancient Greek texts, and marked the rise of Ottoman dominance. While his defiance was brave, it also doomed his people. This decision reminds us that courage alone cannot overcome overwhelming odds. Sometimes, survival requires compromise or retreat. The failure to evacuate Pompeii. In 79 AD, Mount Vesuvius erupted, burying Pompeii and Herculaneum under ash and pumice. Yet, Roman authorities failed to act on warning signs. Days before the eruption, small earthquakes shook the region, but locals dismissed them as normal. Even Pliny the Younger, who witnessed the disaster, noted the lack of urgency. When the eruption began, many stayed behind, believing it would pass. Within hours, pyroclastic flows, superheated clouds of gas and debris, incinerated thousands. Until next time, archaeologists later uncovered victims frozen in time, clutching valuables or trying to flee. Some were found huddled together, seeking comfort in their final moments. Pompeii's fate serves as a timeless lesson. The city's leaders underestimated nature's power, ignoring early warnings. Their failure to evacuate cost around 2,000 lives. Today, the ruins of Pompeii stand as a haunting reminder of humanity's vulnerability and the deadly cost of denial. Thank you for watching. Until next time, stay curious.